Hey everyone, it's your teacher here, Mr. Jennings. Today in General Biology, and this week, we're talking about biotechnology. Normally this unit is fairly short. This little part of the unit's alright, and this time though I decided to spread out a little bit, give us some room to breathe. Oddly enough, this unit has a little bit more of a current event angle than we usually do in most of these. One, we talk about concepts that normally we get to talk about anyway, stuff like cloning and genetic engineering and GMOs. This one goes a little bit further with the current events, especially when it comes to some of the biotech techniques that we're going to watch in a later video. So today, though, we're going to talk about selective breeding. Now, selective breeding is probably one of the oldest examples of biotechnology. It's not really a true technology per se, but it's one of the oldest forms of genetic alteration. So one of the main questions we want to keep in mind here is, how does selective breeding affect genetic variation? Now, before I go any further, so selective breeding is whenever you pick the mate or partners for a certain organism. So for instance, in the picture we see here, we start with a common ancestor, the wolf, and you can see how it has descended and been bred for other dog breeds, other canine species. Yeah, you see all the various European dog breeds, the Asiatic breeds, and then the modern wolves all came from this common ancestor. Now, these dogs here are the result of what we consider selective breeding or artificial selection, where we bred for certain traits that are desirable for humans. So a great example of this is crops. Now, crops, namely the crops such as corn and various other ones like bananas, have been selectively bred. So in the past, farmers would usually saved the best seeds and planted them for the following growing season. Basically took their best crop, took the seeds from that crop and planted it. And doing so, the next season crops will be slightly better, sweeter, whatever the trait they're looking for. But what happened is, over time, the changes became greater. It started off subtle, very slight, but over time, things that were linked to those desirable traits, be it being more disease resistant or resistance to certain predators, those traits for resistance were sometimes linked for other traits that determined like appearance, size, color, etc. Each of those traits that were linked were inherited as a package deal. So if you picked a trait, for instance, we're going to talk about corn here in a second. When you pick the trait for something like corn, it changes how it is going to look and appear for the modern consumer. So, for instance, here the hypothesis: if you keep selecting seed from the biggest ear of corn, what should happen to the overall size of the corn as you move through each growth season? Well, the corn's likely to keep getting bigger. So let me move my little camera here off to the side. So wild corn is actually known as teosinte. Now, teosinte is a wild native grain found in Southwest America and northern Mexico. And I think even actually deeper into Mexico, like central Mexico. Either way, teosinte, it looks like corn, kinda. The kernels are a lot tougher to eat. You really can't eat them. You have to do a lot more treatment to them. So what they found is, and what the hypothesis is, that people who live in these areas really found that, yeah, you could mash teosinte up and eat it, but they started breeding the teosinte that was softer and also had a little bit more kernels to it, and they produced these intermediates, as we see here. And eventually, over time, the intermediates gave rise to the modern corn. Now, the modern corn cob that we know today, we have hard evidence, anthropological evidence. Now, we're going to say anthropological because this is human-based. We have hard anthropological evidence stating that, hey, we can see all these intermediates. Same is true for the banana. We have all sorts of variants of the banana. We have all sorts of variations for most of our major crops, like citrus fruits, apples, etc. Now, selective breeding is going to basically, again, just to recap, it's using natural reproduction to obtain desired characteristics. Selecting desirable traits in offspring by choosing organisms of the same species to mate, often by picking very closely related members. That's not unusual, especially with dog breeds. But you're usually going to breed with two individuals that possess a trait that you desire, and you're going to breed, and hopefully you're going to get more offspring with those traits. And you'll try to continue this process as far as you can. Some examples of selective breeding. For instance, dairy farmers may choose to make only cows that give the most milk. And if you're a cattle farmer, you know that. Not all cows are made the same. There's beef cattle and there's dairy cattle. And typically you pick the dairy cattle because they produce the most milk. Certain seedless fruits are examples of selective breeding. Purebred animals. If you got a purebred German Shepherd, that German Shepherd is a byproduct of selective breeding. Actually, almost every purebred animal, not just dogs. For instance, though, by the way, this hypoallergenic cat is the byproduct of selective breeding. And it was a mutant born to have this. It was a fairly recent mutant in the 70s in Canada, born without fur. They realized, man, this is actually pretty desirable for cats for people who don't want cats, but they're allergic. So what they ended up doing was they kept breeding this cat with other members of its family to produce the hypoallergenic cat known as the Sphinx. And you can even take the wild mustard plant. Let's see if I actually pull it up here. So I'm going to click this one the most. Wild mustard is probably one of the crazier ones that we see here. So, wild mustard, as we see, is actually going to give rise to a variety of different crops that we are familiar with. Zoom in on this page. Alright, so, cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, and numerous other crops, including mustard, all come from the same wild type of mustard. They're all descended from the same common ancestor. Same ancestor in general. There we go. So when we see that, that's something to keep in mind, that we have selective breeding going on all the time, and we are very familiar with it. We see it every day in our lives. We interact with it. And it's all an artificial process. We have humans, for the longest we've known, since they left the hunter-gatherer stage and went to agriculture, we have been selectively breeding organisms for desired traits. And again, this is another example of the common ancestor, the gray wolf, and how it has given rise to numerous dog breeds. Another example of selective breeding is taking a horse and a donkey. Horse being big and fast, a donkey being small and calm. When we take a horse that's big and fast and a donkey that's small and calm, you're going to produce a mule who is strong, has a great endurance, it's calm. Problem, it's a hybrid. And it actually has really bad pressure because it will not be able to produce continued offspring. So it's something we're going to talk about in the evolution unit. Now, real example of selective breeding here, for instance, in 1872, Luther Burbank developed a new potato. He's trying to improve on the Irish potato. Burbank developed a potato that was disease resistant. He reduced the Burbank potato to Ireland to help combat the potato famine that swept the country. So what he did is he took a disease resistant potato, crossed it with a food producing potato, and produced the Burbank hybrid. And this is typically what we do when it comes to... mess up here. This is what we usually do when it comes to making any kind of hybrid. When we want to make these hybrids, we end up making them with usually a wild type or a type that has a trait that we desire. In this case, disease resistance. And they crossed it with a common food-producing potato. Hey, you got a nice potato hybrid that has resistance. Now, there's pros and cons to using selective breeding. The big advantage is you get desired traits. You're going to get the ability to put resistance to diseases. You get things like seedless fruit, bigger crops, bigger milk, loads produced by, for milking, all sorts of desirable traits. So agriculture, this is a major field. The disadvantages, decreases variation. When you're breeding for a single trait, in order to get that desired trait, you're usually going to inbreed. And inbreeding is inherently not terrible for most organisms in terms of mutations necessarily, it's terrible in that it reduces genetic viability and variety. So if an organism is highly inbred, a species is highly inbred, what happens is there's a deleterious trait, or a trait that is bad. Those traits become more amplified within the population. So for instance, recessive genetic disorders become more common. Hip dysplasia in dog breeds, especially large dog breeds like German Shepherds. That's a mutation that's found in the dog breed, the German Shepherd breed, and if you're constantly breeding German Shepherds with purebred German Shepherds, you're going to run out of other purebred gene pools. You're going to start inbreeding, especially if you get them from less than honorable breeding organizations. So what happens is if there's a common recessive disorder found in the gene pool, it's going to become more common because there's just less variety. So certain traits that normally are hidden become more frequent, and that's a big problem. But overall, genetic selective breeding is massive. Its importance on human society and culture is tremendous. So the pros often outweigh the cons, but the cons need to be considered when you're going through the process of selective breeding an organism. So for instance, if you are selectively breeding for an animal, you want to make sure you're crossbreeding distinct different gene pools, different families, to prevent the inbreeding problem. So you want to pick better traits, pick better lineages, and watch for certain genetic disorders. But overall, though, the pros outweigh the cons for most things, but you've got to be mindful of the cons. All right, next time we're going to be talking about, I believe, cloning. Sorry, I get the list of videos over here. Next time we're going to be talking about cloning. So take care. Stay safe out there. See y'all later.